So this is a picture of me as a young Daniel growing up in the woods of Minnesota. And as a young Daniel, there was a lot of things I wanted out of life. I wanted every video game released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. I wanted peppermint chocolate chip ice cream with every meal, or instead of every meal. That would be okay too. But most of all, what I wanted more than anything was a friend. Mario had Luigi, I wanted someone too. So I hatched a plan. There was a boy who rode the bus home with me from elementary school, and he got off on my same stop. And so I decided that when we got off the bus together, I would invite him to my house to play video games, because who could say no to video games? Foolproof plan, right? So we get off the bus, I put my plan into action. He starts walking towards his house, and I start walking after him. And then something strange happens. He starts walking faster. But I decide, that's okay, he's probably just in a hurry to get home. So I start walking faster too, so I can catch up. And then something really weird happens. He starts running, and I don't know what's going on, but I do know that I don't want to let my new friend get away, and so I start running too, so I can catch up to him. And then finally I do, and I catch up to him, and I'm so ready to invite him into my house and start our new friendship when he punches me in the stomach, and he says, "Get away from me!" And he turns, and he leaves, and I'm left to walk home alone. I wish I could tell you that this was an unusual experience for me. I wish I could tell you that this kid was just a jerk, or maybe he was having a bad day, and the next time I reached out in friendship, I was met with open arms. But the fact is, this was a pretty typical experience for me growing up. I don't mean to say that every time I tried to make a friend, I would get punched in the stomach, but sometimes they would kick me in the back. Sometimes they would pretend to like me so they could convince me to eat potato chips that they had secretly spit on. Sometimes they would just stand up and walk away without a word. And the hardest part of all of this rejection is that I thought I deserved it. See, I have a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, which means that I'm on the autistic spectrum. And so I can look back at my childhood and understand why it was so hard for me to fit in. I can understand why I couldn't read other people's social cues or adapt my behavior to fit social norms. But I wouldn't be diagnosed until high school, and so as a kid, I didn't know any of that. I didn't know that my brain wasn't wired to learn social skills naturally, or that there's this whole universe of body language and tone and social nuance that I couldn't see. All I knew is that I couldn't get other people to like me, no matter how hard I tried. And when you're a kid, you try to make sense of the world the best way you can, and the only way that my kid brain could understand my experiences of rejection were to decide that they were my fault. I remember coming home from school, running into my dad's arms and crying out, "I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad." And I believed it. I was 7 years old, and I believed that I was bad because it was the only way I could understand what was happening to me. What I wish I had known back then is that I struggled to find a place to belong, not because I was bad, but because that struggle is just a part of the human experience. And that actually my feelings of loneliness that made me feel so different were things that I had in common with a lot of other people. And I want to demonstrate that with a little exercise that we're all going to do together, if that's okay. What I'd like to do is say a couple of things that are true of me. Some feelings that I experienced that as a kid made me feel really alone, made me feel like I was the only one that felt that way. And if you've ever felt that same way, if you've resonated with the experiences that I share, what I'd like you to do at the end of the list is to raise your hand. So here we go. Here are some of the things that I've experienced. I have felt like I don't belong. I have felt like deep down I'm not like other people. I have felt like I've needed to hide part of who I am to fit in. I have felt afraid that if other people really knew me, they would leave. I have felt lonely, even in a group. If anybody here has resonated with those feelings, if anybody here has had that same experience of any one of those things, could you raise your hand now? Thank you for raising your hands. That's a lot of people. Wow. Thank you, guys. I think what that tells us is that these are pretty universal experiences, that there's just part of being human that means that we all want a place to belong and people that we're connected with, and there's just part of the human experience that means that we've had pain when we don't get that, very significant pain. And that's true regardless of diagnosis. And the moment that I realized that, the moment that I realized my struggle for belonging was not autistic, but human, everything began to change because I started to see the way forward. It happened the first day of my freshman year of high school. To put things into context, just before starting freshman year, my family had moved from Minnesota to California, so I left behind everything that was familiar to me, and I had just been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, so I knew that all of the other kids at school would be neurologically different from me, not just normal different. This terrified me. My mom tells me that on the first day of school, she came to wake me up, and she found that I was covered in a cold sweat because I had been shivering the entire night, just afraid of the morning to come. But once again, I had a plan. Except this time, my plan wasn't to make a friend. It was about survival. I was going to become the invisible man. I would be like one of the secret agent special forces guys from one of my video games, sneaking around behind enemy lines, totally undetected. I was actually kind of excited about this idea. And at first, it worked out really well. I sat in the back of every class, never raised my hand, never talked to anybody. I made it all the way to lunch without any human contact. But lunch presented a problem, because at lunch, you sit at lunch tables, and at lunch tables are other people, and I needed to avoid the other people. So that was okay. I was like a Navy SEAL, parachuted behind enemy lines. Adapt, improvise, overcome, don't talk to anybody, yeah! So I got my food, and I went to my next class, thinking that I would just eat it at my desk. But then disaster struck again. The door to the classroom was locked, the teacher out to lunch. So, adapt, improvise, overcome, I sat on the floor. My first day of freshman year, and I was eating my lunch alone on the floor with my back to the hallway wall, trying very hard not to be noticed. And then I saw something strange. I saw that there was another boy also sitting on the floor with his back to the wall, eating his lunch alone and trying hard not to be noticed. And at that moment, I had a choice to make. See, the invisible man strategy was working. Nobody had punched me in the stomach yet. That was a win. And if I reached out to that other boy, I might lose all of that. He might make fun of me. He might call his friends over to make fun of me. He might decide that I was bad. But the thing that had stuck with me all throughout my day as the invisible man, the thing that I couldn't get out of my head as I just looked at this other boy, is that no matter how hard I tried to be invisible, what I wanted more than anything was to be seen. What I wanted so desperately was for somebody to notice my struggle, sit down next to me and say, hey, it's tough to be new, but I'll be your friend and we'll get through this together. And I realized that this other boy might not be autistic, but he probably was still lonely, still nervous, still wishing that somebody would see him and reach out. And I had the opportunity to be that somebody. So I stood up, I walked over to him and I said, my name's Daniel. And he said, my name's Bobby. And there was a long pause as we kind of sized each other up. And then he said, do you like video games? And I knew at that moment that I had just made my first friend of high school. And not just my first friend, but my best friend. This is a picture of the two of us. Bobby and I became inseparable. And what his friendship taught me is that other people could be sources of joy, not just sources of pain. And so I switched my behavior to try to maximize that joy. And believe me, joy is a far better motivator than pain. And in trying to have more joyful connection, I started to reach out more. I started to work on my social skills. I started to make more friends, people who cared about me and loved me for who I was, even though who I was still kind of awkward. But the problem is that love is kind of like food. You can work off of reserves for a while, but if you don't have a steady supply, you're going to get into trouble. And that's what happened to me. A few years ago, I moved here to Oregon to start a graduate program in clinical psychology, and I left behind my community of family and friends, all of the people who were filling my life with a constant supply of love. And after a few failed attempts to make friends, what I found is that those old fears from childhood started to gain new power. They started to creep back again, and I started to think, maybe I don't belong, maybe I don't deserve to belong, maybe I really am bad all along. And this became self-fulfilling. I stopped reaching out, I stopped going to social events. My first birthday in Oregon, I spent alone in my room eating a pizza by myself because I thought that if I invited people, nobody would come. I had once again become the invisible man. But this time, somebody saw me. One of my classmates, a man named Kyler, noticed that I was drifting through class, never connecting to anybody else. And so he decided to take a risk. One day he sat down next to me and he said, "Hey, let's get lunch." And then lunch turned to Friday nights playing video games together because everything with me is video games. And then our video game time turned into being workout buddies, and little by little, Kyler became my best friend. It's safe to say that Kyler's friendship rescued me. You can see a picture of our friendship. On my own, I couldn't shake my fears that had kept me trapped. I couldn't believe that I deserved a place to belong. But then I had another voice saying, "You do belong. You're not bad. You're my friend." I needed someone else to speak that into my life. I'm reminded of an old Jewish parable called the parable of the long spoons. And it says that heaven and hell are the exact same place. Everybody's seated around a big pot of delicious soup, and everybody has a really long spoon. And in hell, everyone is starving because they try to feed themselves, but they just can't. The spoon is too big, the soup spills every time. But in heaven, people have realized something important. They've realized that their spoons are not for feeding themselves, they're for feeding someone else. And so they feed each other and are fed in return. I used to think that being autistic meant that there was something wrong with my spoon, that everybody else could go out and get their fill of love and connection and belonging whenever they wanted. But the truth is, I was wrong. None of us have a self-sufficient spoon. All of us need each other to create that place of belonging. And all of us deserve each other to create that place of belonging for us. Nobody is bad. Nobody is disqualified. And it's never too late for anybody to find that place. And the cool thing is, we all have the ability to create that place for someone else. Just as Kyler reached out to me and I reached out to Bobby, you all have the ability to reach out to somebody in your life. And that might sound like a small thing, but I want you to understand just how monumental it actually is. A meta-analysis of 148 research studies covering over 300,000 participants found that greater social connection was connected to a 50% reduced risk of premature death. 50%. That's equivalent to the effect of quitting smoking, and it's greater than the effect of exercise or obesity on mortality. If you discovered that you had a 50% chance to heal any disease just by touching somebody, that all you had to do was to reach out your hand, I guarantee you that every single one of you would be jumping out of your seats. You'd be running to the nearest hospital, running into every single room, saying, "Everybody gets a high five. I want to spread this healing as far as I can." If you had that incredible power of healing, you wouldn't waste it. And what I want you to understand is that you do have that kind of power. Not the power to heal with a touch, but the power to heal with your friendship. Through the simple decision to be a friend, you can help somebody else believe that they are good. You can give somebody the courage to go through life knowing that they don't have to do it alone. And in someone's darkest moment, your love might be the reason they choose life over suicide. That is the power of friendship, and that is a power that each and every one of you have. Autistic, neurotypical, social butterfly, or total wallflower, it doesn't matter. All of you have the ability to sit down next to somebody and invite them to lunch or to play video games. All of you have the ability to call up somebody that you haven't talked to for a while just to check in. All of you have the ability to meet the deep human need for connection and belonging that somebody else has been carrying and maybe has been carrying for a long time. I am the man that I am today because of the power of friendship, because of people who looked past my awkwardness and saw my value, because of the people who gave me the courage to say that I am not bad, I am loved. Every single one of you has that exact same power. All of you have the incredible, mind-boggling ability to change the course of somebody's life and your own through the simple decision to be a friend. So put your spoon to work. Spread some healing, and go be a friend. Thank you.